Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Marr, and I just want to briefly go over some of the options for upcoming projects. We haven't really gotten into materials yet, and it's okay to experiment. We're going to have a lot of different choices. You're not limited to what we go over today, but I did want to talk a little bit about watercolor, and I wanted to talk a little bit about watercolor pencils and colored pencils. First of all, if you're using watercolors, one of the ways that you can use watercolors is very loosely and wet, and one of the things you can do is you can wet the page beforehand in the areas that you want the watercolor to loosely wash across. And if you're using watercolors, you want to work from light to dark and background to foreground to some extent, not 100%. But I'm specifically going around the sailboat. Now, if I knew for sure that my sailboat was going to be a dark color, like this tree is going to be a dark color, I would go right through the whole sky and then put the sailboat on top of it. Like if it was a pirate ship or a galleon and it was going to be brown and wood and dark, I would go right through it and go over it. But where it could be lighter, I'm not going to do that. And because I want to show you guys, I'm just wetting some of my paints here. Where the water is, the paints will tend to go there, but they're not going to tend to go where it's dry. Okay, so, you want to be careful. If you paint in there, it's going to be, be painted. But for the most part, it will only go where the wetness is on the paper. And this is a special watercolor paper. It's a little thicker. It doesn't have a lot of I keep hitting my cord here. It doesn't have a lot of sizing on it, so the colors absorb right into the surface of the paper. Okay, now I'm starting out with my sky lighter at the bottom. I can leave it sort of variegated, make room for clouds. I can go in and put slightly different colors. While it's wet, they're going to blend. Little eraser pieces that are getting stuck in there, which will brush away. But the beauty of watercolor is that you start out light and you don't use white. You use the white of the paper and differing degrees of pigment and water. So if you put a lot of pigment in, you're not going to use these like tempera, first of all, or acrylics, or anything that just covers. You're layering translucent layers that will build color. And the colors will be more sophisticated because of that. So I might want to get some deeper yellows there. I can go into my pinks if I want. Add some pinks in there. You get a nice wash of color. So you could work entirely in watercolor if you wanted to. Or you can work entirely in colored pencil if you wanted to. Or a combination of both. Now, we have two different kinds of colored pencils. One is a watercolor colored pencil, and one is just a regular colored pencil. I'm just getting a little more pigment down here. If you do go into an area that you didn't want to go into, you can, whoops, all my brushes are running away on me. While it's still wet, you can kind of push that back. I'm taking a clean brush now that doesn't have anything on it. I'm just kind of wiping it back. And a little bit of orange reflecting in the sail isn't a bad thing anyway. But while it's wet, it hasn't absorbed into the paper permanently yet. So you can kind of push it away. I could dab it with a paper towel too. Say I wanted clouds. I could come in here with a kind of crunched up paper towel and get the feeling of clouds up in there. And I would definitely not keep it this light. I'd put more layers. The paints are going to adhere differently if it's dry than if it's wet. And there are lots of different ways to do watercolor beyond what I'm showing you today. You can tell even now this is drier and the colors are more saturated and they're not moving and spreading quite as much. Okay. Whoops, I keep hitting that cord. Sorry, guys. You get seasick. Okay, if I want to get sort of a mottled, cloudy effect, I can do that. I can go back in and add more water and spread it thinner if I want. I can add more pigment and layer it. And I can do that down in the bottom too. And I can put more than one color on my brush. I can do a little pink and a little yellow wet at the same time. That wasn't so much yellow as pink, but because the paper's wet and because there's a lot of water on my brush, they're going to blend together. Okay, if I were to have clouds down here, they'd be very small and appear to be far away. Clouds that are closer to us are going to be more formed. You're going to see them as more formed. You'd see more variation in them. You could have a wider range of lights to darks. You're going to see more detail. Same thing with waves, really. If I were to go into the water, and I can do the, well, I'm going to put a wash down. Now, there's one or two things. I'm going to start this. It takes a little longer to do color pencil, but I shouldn't have wet that. I should dry that a little bit. Show you some options first. So if I were just using color pencil, okay, I can go in there and layer some color pencil in there. Okay, now I can, you don't want to see the white of the paper when you're doing color pencils, but you don't want to push really hard so that it's flat and shiny either. And you want to keep your pencil marks light so that you don't get that gray spreading around. Okay, so I would do close, even strokes to kind of fill in. And you probably would pick one method. I'm showing you a bunch of different ones on one page just to speed things up a little bit. Now you get plenty of control around the sailboat now because you're just going to have more control with a pencil. Okay. And I can go right through here because I know my tree is going to be darker. Now, as I get down here, I want to see more variation in the water where the waves are. I'm not going to do color pencil for the whole thing. But if I were, I would layer and build just the way I am with my clouds and my sky, slowly and methodically adding more until you can't see the white of the paper unless it's literally meant to be white. Okay, so it would take a lot of layering to really do color pencil well. Now, because these are not just color pencil, you could just literally do this and just do more and more layers until you get sophisticated blends of color. That would be just fine. It's going to take some time to do well. I'm making it a little darker down here beyond the boat because the boat would kind of cast a shadow if the sun is back here. Okay, it also means the boat could be in silhouette, and if the sun is setting, you're not going to see a white sail as white or a blue boat as blue. The colors of the sky reflect into the water, but they would also be bouncing off the objects. All right, so I would definitely do more layers if I were just doing color pencil. However, what I want to show you is watercolor pencil. Now, back here, you're not going to see every individual wave. It's going to just, it may seem lighter. It might be reflecting a cloud bank up here, not perfectly and evenly the way it looks up there. And the more pigment you put down, the more painterly it will become when you wet it if you're doing the color pencil approach. So, for instance, did it again. If I wet this, not all color pencils, but watercolor pencils, it's going to give a feeling of a watercolor. But you had a little more control in putting the colors down there. Okay, so that will wet. And because I knew I was going to wet it, I didn't do it as thoroughly as I would have if I were just doing color pencil. Now I would put more color pencil down here to get the effect that I'm looking for. And keep in mind, if you're in an area that's dark and you're washing it like this, and then you want to go to a light area, you're going to want to clean that brush off, whether it's wetting the watercolor pencils or the actual watercolor itself. Keep some clean water around, keep some paper towels around, and use that. Now this, I know this is going to be like a rocky shore, so I can paint right into that and it's not going to matter. Okay. I probably would have some sense of highlight on my boat, but I'll build that up slowly. Okay. So this was the watercolor pencil. This was straight watercolors. Neither one is done. That's just one layer. Let's move to some of the other ones that I already did, just to give you an idea how you can do a combination of both. This was watercolor. Might have been color pencil in the sky that I wet. But you can go in and you can get more variation by either layering. I think this one I layered more watercolor and have more of a variation of lights and darks, because like I said, I washed the sky because these are darker and I knew I was going to do a variation of darker colors. It was okay to just put the sky down there and then build this on top of it. That's all watercolor. Okay, layers of watercolor, and I would still do more layers of watercolor, each one building a wider range of values and each one building more texture and just developing layers of different, more sophisticated colors. So I can come in here now. This is dry, and I can do more texture. I can layer the colors more, and I can keep it as pencil if I want it mixed media. If I want it to appear to be a little more controlled, I can go in. You wouldn't necessarily see all these details anyway, but we can go in. Maybe I want to put some more darks or some more textures into my branches. The light is low, so you're going to see it mostly in silhouette, particularly deep down in the shadows here. But building it on top, like if I just went in with brown on white paper, it's not going to look that good. So building it on top of layers of greens or other colors, depending on what you're doing, is going to give you a much richer effect. And you want some varied value in there too. Deep in here, it's probably going to be so shadowy you can't see. But as you come out here, it's going to cast, it's going to appear to be in shadow because the sun is behind it. But I'm getting more texture, more control, more detail, even though I'm getting less vivid color. And I can come down. I want it wispier, or pointier. Okay. But building layers and layers and layers will make it for an interesting picture. Now I can come in here, do the same thing. If I'm behind the sailboat, you might see the waves rolling. I would strongly suggest you look at pictures of sunsets if you're going to do a sunset, and waves if you're going to do waves, to get an idea of what you can do to make it more realistic, if that's the route you're going. Like some of you are doing editorial cartooning and it's going to be more exaggerated, or you're following a different path. But no matter what you're doing, you could be using watercolor or colored pencil, or you could do Sharpie and do it with cross hatching or pointillism too. Now, I'm not going to outline something we haven't talked about in regard to this video. Is I'm not going to outline everything. We're going to use implied edges. So we know where the palm tree ends and where the water begins just because they're different. Okay, you don't need an outline to show that. It looks like I'm outlining it here, but I'm planning on filling that in. That's just shadowy areas that I'm building up. It's sort of like an underpainting, and then maybe we'll get a little more tone in there. But on this side, you're going to get more shadows. And I would probably wet that just because I know I can after I get some more colors in there. But you could keep layering it as colored pencil. Put some oranges or yellows or reds or other tones over it and tone that down. The other thing you can do, I don't think I have one handy, is use a stump. Okay, well, not a stump to be... Oh, there's a stump right there. And that will smooth. If you have different layers of color pencil, it'll smooth it more than it's just going to smooth one layer. You can sort of burnish things together and layer them and build them. Okay, and a stump will do that, help you do that. Okay, I can come in and say this is a blue boat. You're barely going to see that it's blue. In this case, it might be a violet boat. You're not going to see it as blue, so it's okay that it has a little violet in there and a little brown in there to make it shadowy on the dark side away from the water. You're not really going to be able to tell. Not fully, anyway. It might be different on this side. But the orange might mute it and neutralize it a little bit, too. It's also going to be lighter where the sun is hitting it and more in shadow where it's not. You really would want to use very little black. I am using black right now, but for the most part, you wouldn't want to use black when you could mix colors to get something more specific. Like, so for instance, if I wanted to do this tree and I had it, if I was making it green and shadowy, I could mix some red into that to get a toned down green. And that would be a more natural shadow than using black. Okay? So this isn't done by a long shot, but those are just some different techniques to consider that we haven't really talked a lot about in class. Okay, if you have any questions, you can ask me in class. Have a good day.